One of the most urgent tasks for our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, and this is the best day of the week. Not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Executive Vice President of the Heartland Institute and your host. The Heartland Institute is an organization that has been around for 41 years, and we are known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland and this show bringing the data, the science, the truth that counters the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope you will help us out and bring friends to view this live stream every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And also like, share, and subscribe, and leave some comments underneath this video. We do read them, and this all helps convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program. And that gets it in front of even more people. And as a reminder, big tech and the legacy media, the dying legacy media, do not really approve of the way we cover climate and energy policy on this program. So Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So there is a way you can support this show. You can go to heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you will be joining other friends of this program who help bring it to the world every single week. We also want to thank our streaming partners who also help get this show in front of more people. JunkScience.com, CFACT, What's Up With That, the CO2 Coalition, and Heartland UK Europe. We have a big show today as usual, so let's get started. Today we have with us Anthony Watts. He's Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change, What's Up With That. Sterling Burnett, the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose day job is being director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center for Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. And Linnea Lucan, Research Fellow for Energy and Environment Policy at Heartland. And of course, we always have our producer, Andy Singer, in the background, making sure this show looks and flows just great. Before we get into our big show today, I want to make a bit of an announcement. We've made this on the last couple of Climate Realism shows. The Heartland Institute's 16th International Conference on Climate Change is coming up this spring. It is April 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C. This conference is the leading conference that examines the data and the science and explains what's really happening on this planet. It is the climate conference to be to if you're interested in this subject. You should attend. You should bring friends. You should especially bring young people. You are going to be able to meet and mingle with the leading lights in climate science, men like Willie Soon. One of our keynote speakers is going to be Nobel Prize winner in 2022 for physics, John Clauser, who explains probably the most prestigious man in the climate realism movement. He is going to be there. You can go to heartland.org. You will see a feature there at the webpage that you can click on for the climate conference, and you can look at our schedule. You can look at the speakers that we have confirmed so far. You would definitely want to go to this conference if you're in Washington, D.C. area, or if you're anywhere in the world, because we are going to have speakers and attendees from all over the world. Just a reminder, we have a special discounted early bird rate that ends this weekend. I believe you better get your tickets before Saturday if you want to guarantee that you get a little bit of a discount on that ticket. So we really, really hope to see you all there. All right. How's everybody doing today? We don't have a guest, so maybe we have a little bit more time to relax and get through a lot of topics today. Can somebody speak? That way I can enjoy my
yeah.
I guess I'd like
got your intro going, Jim.
I'll open with two things. First off, about the dying legacy media you mentioned. It was heartening this week to see that the Washington Post, one of the official papers of record, laid off, I think, 14 climate reporters. Now, it was a little disappointing to find out that they had 14 climate reporters.
They had 19 climate reporters.
They had 19 and but even 14 was, as far as I can tell, probably 14 too many. But they had 19. They've laid off 14. I sad for the people, not so sad for the institution and the coverage. The second thing is, as an archbishop, I'm willing to sell indulgences. You can make the donations to Heartland, but if you note in your notice when you're making the payment that it's for the indulgence, I will actually say a little special climate prayer for you.
I did not know you sold indulgences. We're going to need our cut on that. We'll have.
I want it all to go to you. I just want to,
All right. Yes, I was actually going to mention that in the thing. The whole idea of the Washington Post. In fact, I should have pulled it up for Andy, but I didn't do it. Our friend Mark Morano tweeted out. There's a chart of the number of climate reporters at the Washington Post, just the Washington Post. Mm-hmm. And it was like in 2020 there were like 5 of them, and then in 2022 it went up to 30. They had as many as 30 climate.
There it is. Yeah, you got it right there.
No, I don't know if that's the one. Anyway, but it just showed they had at one point just a couple of years ago they had 30 climate reporters, and then they knocked it down to 19, and now it's down to just 5. Again, that might be 5 too many.
You got to remember they're getting
Andy.
They're getting funding. All these papers are getting funding from climate alarmed foundations, to cover climate change. I don't know if Washington Post got specific money from those institutions, but AP did a lot of money to cover climate.
And I presume the Associated Press is still getting lots of money to keep those really useless. Useless for real news, but useful for climate propaganda purposes in these other news outlets. So at least the Washington Post is not going to have it anymore. So,
yeah, well, right. we're still going to continue to debunk them on climate realism, even though they're weakened. It should be even much easier than it used to be, like shooting fish in a barrel.
Yes, I guess we're not going to get any more stories about the intersection of race, gender, and climate anymore, and we'll just get pretty ordinary propaganda instead. So we have that.
Don't count on that, Jim. Don't count on that.
We'll see what their priorities are going forward. All right.
Gender in fruit flies changed because of climate change. I can see this as a research topic that we fund out of the federal government.
We ought to have a contest. Actually, we're going to have to do this on this show. We should have a contest with audience participation where we pick out a subject of a climate study, and you have to decide whether it's real or fake. I think that'd be a really fun game. We're going to have to do that. And I bet we get a lot of people missing those answers. I would guarantee you.
Yeah.
Where are we going to find one that's real, Jim?
That's true.
No, where are we going to find one that's fake? Right. Because almost everything that you can imagine, they've actually done.
Right. So anyway, that's just an idea popped in my head. All right. Let's get on to the regular scheduled programming here on the Climate Realism Show. And that is covering the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. All right, now this is actually our main topic for today. We wanted to switch it up a little bit. This is a pretty important story, and this came across the discussions that we've had this week about this topic as we work through our work week through the week. And this is a chance, it seems, that carbon taxes are going to be revived by the Republican Party, specifically in the Senate. So let's talk about this news. I'll read it from the Daily Caller. Headline: Republicans let carbon tax framework slip through funding bill, opponents warn. A directive buried in January minibus materials is the first step toward carbon taxes or tariffs, several energy policy experts told the Daily Caller News Foundation. The January 15th Energy and Environment Bill package included a Senate Appropriations Committee's bill report which directs the Department of Energy to review the carbon intensity of U.S. produced goods and compare those emissions with similar products made abroad, including aluminum, cement, steel, plastics, and crude oil. Opponents of the initiative told the Daily Caller News Foundation that the review could eventually punish companies for energy use and serves as a gateway for carbon taxes and tariffs. They argue the review effectively instructs the government to set a price for carbon emissions, but doesn't clearly limit how the government could use that price later. Though not legally binding, federal agencies tend to comply with the report's directives, according to the Congressional Research Service. It's not clear who placed the directive into the report, E&E News reported. The Daily Caller News Foundation reached out to every Republican on the Senate Appropriations Committee to determine who added this language, but received no responses. Now, that is a very, very bad sign. Senate Republicans, all of them on the committee, are hiding from this. And this was passed weeks ago and really only noticed now. But the secret is now exposed. By the way, the Department of Energy, Trump's Department of Energy, would also not return calls to the Daily Caller. Here's one last bit from our friend and friend of the show, Jason Isaac. Quote, this Senate Appropriations report quietly resurrects carbon accounting as federal policy, giving legitimacy to the same ESG framework driving Europe's carbon border taxes, says Jason Isaac, CEO of the American Energy Institute. Once Washington starts ranking U.S. products by emissions intensity, those metrics inevitably become regulatory and trade weapons, regardless of intent. That approach contradicts the administration's effort to unwind the endangerment finding and the greenhouse gas reporting regime. America should be dismantling ESG, not laundering it through appropriations language written for Brussels and not U.S. consumers. Now, Sterling, let me start with you. As I mentioned, we have been chatting with our friends in the climate realism movement about this news this week.
Yep.
What are we to make of it?
You know, I was also quoted in that story, and when they came to me, I've got to say I was a bit surprised that this had, like Dracula, risen from the dead. But the danger of this, look, Republicans loved this a few years ago. They loved it under Obama. They loved it under Biden because not all Republicans, but the Republicans that were trying to cozy up with the Greens, that wanted to say, oh, we believe in, we're worried about climate change too. We'll do something about it. And how were they going to do it? Well, they were going to do this assessment of emissions, relative emissions, and then they were going to use that assessment to impose border tariffs on goods coming from other countries that didn't have as good a carbon record as us. They said, oh, well, we won't impose it on U.S. companies. It'll just be on those countries shipping us goods that aren't as clean as us. The promise. The problem is you do that, and then suddenly tariffs are imposed on you because there's nothing in our various trade agreements that says you can start imposing tariffs based on emissions intensity. Plus, it's just a backdoor way to get a carbon tax imposed. If you think carbon emissions are dangerous and must be monitored, then 3 years from now, when President Trump is no longer president, and who knows who will come in, they will now have the tool and the data to say, oh, well, gosh, our cement manufacturers, our steel manufacturers, putting out a lot of CO2. We know because the DOE did this report. We're going to have to get back to fighting climate change, and how to do it is reduce your carbon intensity, reduce your emissions, and Republicans provided them the tool. They're basically mandating the DOE do this report and provide future Democratic administrations, Democratic-controlled Congresses with the power to impose tariffs and taxes based on carbon emissions, which we thought we'd gotten rid of. We have an administration that does not accept the idea that carbon emissions are dangerous. They accept the science that carbon dioxide emissions aren't dangerous, and that we shouldn't be imposing regulations based on that stuff. They're getting rid of the endangerment findings sooner or later. Don't know what the justification will be, whether it'll be legal or scientific or both. But regardless, why are Republicans resurrecting bad climate policy?
Sterling, this was one of those things that came out of that mostly Republican staffed committee that they had on climate stuff, wasn't it? Where they had like tons of Republicans bizarrely in this group, including, I believe, Lee Zeldin was one of the people.
It was actually split equally between Republicans and Democrats, I believe. But they had co-chairs, Republicans and Democrats.
And there were
the climate caucus.
Yeah, and there were so many Republicans who were on board with this. I think it was either last year or the year before. I think I was trying to find it while you were talking, but we wrote something up about this particular issue. Very, like, it feels like yesterday. And they killed it. And I was very surprised when I learned that they had snuck it back in again. And because I thought even the Democrats wouldn't even care to sneak something like this in. But this is one of those weird, like, Republicans for climate measures that have been floating around out there for years.
I don't think they get it. The Congressional Climate Caucus tried this, and then they tried to run on this in the elections, and they were wiped out. Half of the caucus lost their seats either in the primaries or in the elections, with some Republican seats going Democrat for the first time. Because if you're going to be a Democrat, you can't out-Democrat a Democrat.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because, like, if you're going to run on climate stuff, why would people who cared about climate stuff vote for the Republican when they probably also care about other Democrat issues? Yeah. They're going to vote. There was a big push, and this is me going off on a little bit of a tangent, but if you'll bear with me for a second, there was a bit of a push for a little while from some of the like young Republicans groups, where there were like young Republicans for climate action things. And those all just died on the branch too, because no one believes it.
Well, I also wondered from the start whether they were really young Republicans or just sort of grass. They were fake grassroots groups, because I've also worked in the gun policy space. And every time I hear someone say, I'm a gun owner and I believe in gun control. Oh, I'm a hunter and I believe in all these restrictions. It was like, well, are you really?
Well, Sterling, I'm sure they are Republicans. They're just not the kind of Republicans any of us would vote for.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're rhinos. They're Republicans. Yeah. Yeah. Rockefeller Republicans, we used to call them.
Lots and lots of those in the Mountain West. Lots and lots.
Yeah, but there shouldn't be so many now, and there shouldn't be so many that feel so confident or feel like this is what they need to do, politically or philosophically. I mean, I thought we were beyond this. In fact, I saw it just seems to be a real disconnect here between what the Trump administration is trying to do and how this gets slipped in, and the fact that the Republicans on the Senate committee are not returning phone calls. The Department of Energy is not returning phone calls to a very friendly media outlet. That to me is a really, really bad sign. And this comes just this week. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, was on Capitol Hill testifying. I was going to grab the clip, but I don't really think it's necessary. But in his testimony, he was asked about, what is the administration doing to help people who have their whose homes are being damaged by climate change. And he had said that he admonished the representative from Houston, Texas, a Democrat, saying, didn't you see that the journal Nature had to retract one of the main papers upon which this entire climate scare is based? So we don't need to do these kind of mitigations. So he says that on Capitol Hill the same week this story comes out, that Republicans are basically trying to sneak Biden and Obama administration policy through a hidden secret side door. It's just crazy.
I think it's Chamber of Commerce stuff, like a lot of the carbon capture stuff is. I think it's all just silly, wishy-washy nonsense.
You got to remember, it's not the entire Republican caucus that supported this. It was a few that could have sunk a bill they were attaching to had it not had their stuff. They log roll all the time. I'll give you your stuff and you give me mine. So a few Republicans wanted it, and it wasn't important enough to the caucus, and they had the support of all the Democrats, and it wasn't important enough to the caucus to say, no, we're going to fight you on this. We're not going to put it in. we need to get, their idea was we need to get this bill done. If that's what it takes to get it past the finish line, we'll allow it.
Right. Anthony, do you want any comment on this, or should we move on?
Well, it sucks.
Short and sweet.
Is that your considered opinion on the matter, Anthony?
It does suck, and we'll see. I mean, I think the pressure now because of this story, and we'll see if that gets removed. We'll see how it goes.
I will say this kind of reminds me of that famous thing. We had to pass the bill to see what was in it, kind of a situation. Remember that from about a decade ago?
That was
Pelosi.
That was the healthcare bill.
That was on Obamacare. Yeah, we had to pass the bill to see what was in it. So yeah, great. All right, let's move on to another story, and this comes from a friend of the show and frequent chat participant Charles Rotter at the wonderful What's Up With That website. The headline here is finally a truly unprecedented weather event. In a world where climate scientists constantly cry unprecedented at every warm weather anomaly, here's a genuinely rare meteorological story that deserves the term on its own merits. Florida, of all places, has now seen 2 consecutive winters with measurable snow. For anyone who's lived in the Sunshine State, snow has traditionally been an oddity, an occasional flurry every once a decade or two, sometimes only seen in the air and never on the ground. Those rare events were curiosities, photo ops for tourists, and a few bewildered locals staring at the white stuff before it melted away. And so there's also another unprecedented winter weather and snow event that we're going to get to in a minute. But Anthony, you are a meteorologist, and this is on your website. Why don't you flesh this out for us?
Well, it demonstrates that weather extremes are not over. We only got a short amount of weather history that we can rely on, and so weather extremes are a natural part of the whole climate system, and they're not driven by climate. They're just natural variation. I mean, you look at any statistical model of data and you will see outliers on it. It's just a normal thing. And so that's what we've got here. We just happen to have 2 outliers at a particular time, and which is unprecedented. Now, if it were the other way around, that Florida set heat wave records 2 consecutive years in a row, the media would be all over it. It's absolute proof of climate change. Florida is going to be uninhabitable by 2050. All these crazy headlines, right? But when it's cold, they just go.
Except
Right?
Anthony, that they're not silent. You covered the New York Times story where they said cold is also caused by climate change. These extremes are caused by climate change. It's amazing. It wasn't just Florida. They had below freezing weather for the first time ever recorded in Cuba.
Yep. We have a video on that to flesh it out for our audience. If you could play that for us, Andy.
Truly unprecedented.
The first time in history, Cuba, the tropical island, has recorded freezing temperatures. People are shivering in the cold, something they have never experienced before. But due to the U.S. embargo, it has become difficult to even obtain fuel supplies. This is Kang Jae-mook reporting.
That is one of the most
Waves
weirdest
crash
international
violently on the
videos
coast,
I've
ready
ever
to swallow
seen.
everything. Strong winds shake trees violently and the streets are submerged underwater. An unusual cold wave has swept over Cuba, the Caribbean isle known for warmth, leading to freezing temperatures for the first time.
I've lived here in this town for many years, but I've never experienced a cold wave like today before.
Cuba faces an unusual chill, with winter averaging 18 degrees Celsius. This cold wave is attributed to polar air masses that have entered the Caribbean Sea. The problem is aggravated by President Trump's energy embargo, which has made it hard to use fuel. The U.S. has blocked oil supplies from Venezuela and is also pressuring Mexico, which had been providing humanitarian aid assistance to Cuba, to halt its oil exports.
Well, it's a failed nation now, and they're not getting any money from Venezuela, and they're not getting any money from anywhere. It's a failed nation. Mexico is going to cease sending them oil.
With an unprecedented cold winter threatening survival, Cuban authorities have effectively declared a state of emergency. MBN News, Kang Jae-mook.
I think I'm about 30% certain. I didn't actually watch the video before we had it. I just put the link in the notes. I'm about 30% certain that might be completely AI. But the fact does remain that there were snowflakes in the sky in Cuba. And I love the spin on this story that it's, of course, it's America's fault,
Right?
if they suffer. But
well, we have had that. We have had that long embargo on winter coats for Cuba, so it is our fault. They have no coats. They clamor for them, but we stop them from going in.
Yeah. I will say the only good thing is that those 1950 cars that they drive around down there have excellent heaters in them.
yeah, right. Anyway, so the point being that it's strange things happen. It used to be, you'd say it's a cold day in hell before you do something. Now it's if you had ever said it'll be snowing in Cuba before you do something, I guess you got to go do it. It's up to you now. Yeah. All right, moving on. Our next item here is, I've titled it Models versus Models. And this is, well, I think there's going to be a lot I have to read here for background, but I think this is very interesting and it's a very good topic of conversation. This comes to us, of course, from our friends at the UK Guardian. Headline: Flawed economic models mean climate crisis could crash global economy, experts warn. Flawed economic models mean the accelerating impact of the climate crisis could lead to a global financial crash, experts warn. Recovery would be far harder than after the 2008 financial crash, they said, as, quote, we can't bail out the earth like we did the banks, unquote. As the world speeds towards 2°C of global heating, the risks of extreme weather disasters and climate tipping points are increasing fast. But current economic models used by governments and financial institutions entirely miss such shocks, the researchers said. Instead, forecasting that steady economic growth will be slowed only by gradually rising average temperatures. This is because the models assume the future will behave like the past, despite the burning of fossil fuels pushing the climate system into uncharted territory. Tipping points, such as the collapse of critical Atlantic currents or the Greenland ice sheet, would have global consequences for society. I would think so. Some are thought to be at or very close to their tipping points, but the timing is difficult to predict. Combined extreme weather disasters could wipe out national economies, the researchers from the University of Exeter and financial think tank Carbon Tracker Initiative said. Their report concludes governments, regulators, and financial managers must pay far more attention to these high impact but lower likelihood risks, because avoiding irreversible outcomes by cutting carbon emissions is far cheaper than trying to cope with them. Quote, we're not dealing with manageable economic adjustments, said Dr. Jesse Abrams at the University of Exeter. The climate scientists we surveyed were unambiguous. Current economic models cannot capture what matters most: the cascading failures and compounding shocks that define climate risk in a warmer world and could undermine the very foundations of economic growth, unquote. Linnea, the only prediction models worse than the climate models are probably the economic models. And if you put them together, I think you tear a hole in the space-time continuum of junk science.
Yeah, I think that's about right. So, okay, to straighten out all of that for the audience, it is our economic models need to take climate change into account more. And also, it's worthless, actually, to take it into account because climate change is so aggressive and so dangerous that it will collapse economies in general. And so, really, we're just doomed, is basically what I got out of that article. They don't know what they want. They do know what they want. They want control and the power of, their propaganda outlets and stuff. But they do not want anything substantive at all. So, the economic models are not made to deal with changes in weather because they can't deal with changes in weather. It's not the kind of thing that they are. you have all these different like insurance companies and stuff now that have these climate divisions where they try to claim that they can take into account changes in the weather. And they try, it's all like a climate change scam thing, though. They'll say, oh, this house is valued differently because using RCP 8.5 in 50 years, it'll be all underwater here. So your house value is nil. So that kind of nonsense. That's what they're doing now. That's how they incorporate climate change into economic models. It's garbage left and right. Yeah, they're just trying to find another thing to complain about. Really, there's really no merit whatsoever to their claims. There already are economic models that factor in climate, and they're all junk. It's actually to the point where we covered this for Climate Realism a couple weeks ago. One of these insurance companies that's been doing these like climate scores that they're giving for different properties is being sued left and right and is being removed from like Zillow and stuff. Because their valuations are so impossible and inaccurate. They're saying that people's houses are in a dangerous flood zone when it's up on top of a major hill or something. The house will never be damaged by a flood, but their climate models say that it will. So therefore, they give the house like this is a dangerous property to buy kind of marking on the website, which of course drives people away. So they're already doing it, and it's stupid and it doesn't work. So that's my.
Yeah, this reminds me of something that might come out of the Paul Krugman school of major failed economics. I mean, Paul Krugman of the New York Times, had forecast all kinds of economic things, and he was totally wrong about it. Then he got into climate, and he was totally wrong about that. So this feels like something that he would design, take the two things that are wrong and turn it into something that's super wrong. And that's what we've got here. And as Linnea points out, this is just ridiculous. These valuations they're trying to put on property and so forth, they're just bizarre. And that's why there's this pushback now where they're being sued at Zillow and so forth. But the other thing I want to point out is Linnea said economic models can't capture weather. Well, that's true. They can't. But stock exchanges can. For example, the farm stock exchanges, corn futures and things like that. They will show the vagaries of weather. But the interesting thing is that even with the vagaries of weather, we have a bad year one year and a great year another year, we still have this increasing trend, not just in the United States, but globally, of increased cereal grain production. It has not stopped. It continues to go up, up, and up. And so if, in fact, climate change is going to collapse economies, I would say look at the agriculture first, because, without agriculture, well, the economies don't work.
Well, it's one of those things. Sorry, Sterling, but it's one of those things that makes sense, if you look at it and then just don't think about it any further than first glance or like a headline level understanding. You think, oh yeah, well, if climate change destroys all of these industries and stuff, like if it's constantly wrecking small economies, especially in the third world and stuff, then and if eventually every property on a beach in the United States is underwater, then yeah, that would impact your economics like quite a bit. But you can't trust any of that stuff.
Yeah,
it's
there you
completely
go.
unreliable.
Well,
Look at that.
Climate models are notably awful at projections, and economic models are also often awful at projections. So when you combine the two, well, what could go wrong there? My thought was, I think back and I say, well, let's go back 20 years. And you're thinking about your finances, how to invest your money, to set up your retirement. And there's a new firm on the block called Climate Tracker Initiative. Do you look at them and think, oh, that's a financial firm? They're out there competing with, Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan Chase. Right alongside them, Climate Tracker Initiative. Well, that's where I'm going to put my money, because they clearly have a long track record of predicting economic trends and bringing, helping people secure wealth. They're not a financial firm. They're a climate alarmist firm. posing as a financial firm. They are, and they've, to be fair, they've got it in their name, climate tracker. It's not economic performance. And then they say underneath, well, yeah, what we do is plug in climate. Now they're honest about it. We're a financial firm, climate tracker firm. That's not finance.
I have a belief that in the future, and the not too distant future, we will probably see some kind of Bitcoin type money based on climate or carbon or something, carbon Bitcoin or some crazy thing like that. It'll be just like the crazy carbon certificates they used to issue that had absolutely no value and was just another money laundering scheme. Virtually all of those businesses are gone. But yeah, they're going to try it again. Climate Bitcoin is in your future. Watch for it.
Well, and I say if it comes, it'll be like Sam Bankman-Fried that creates it. The guy that got in trouble for his fraudulent stuff.
Yeah, it scams all the way down. All right, let's move on to our fourth item here. And I try to be a little clever. Bipolar polar bears is the title of this one. This comes from Climate Depot, our friend of the show and friend of us personally, Mark Morano, who is also on the program, speaking at our climate conference in April. He wanted to have some fun with the flip-flops on how climate change is supposedly harming polar bears. The headline, flip-flop climate makes polar bears skinny and fat. He points out that on January 29th, CBS News had a headline, fat, healthy polar bears surprise researchers. And the caption underneath their little video there said that a leader of a team that spent 20 years monitoring hundreds of polar bears in Norway's Svalbard Arctic archipelago tells CBS News he was surprised to see the bears thriving as climate change shrinks the sea ice cover in the region. Tina Kraus of CBS looks at the remarkable discovery, what's behind it, and why it doesn't come with any guarantees for the bears' future. So all good news, still sucks. All right. Second thing he pointed out was National Geographic headline, these polar bears are getting fatter as sea ice melts. What's going on? Indeed, what is going on? They printed, the finding offers a small window of hope for a polar bear population vulnerable to the effects of climate change. But researchers in Svalbard, Norway, found something unexpected about their polar bear population. When sea ice levels decreased around the archipelago, the bears got fatter. They report in a new study in the Journal of Scientific Reports. Another one, headline, New York Times, January 29th, just a few days ago. Some polar bears are getting fatter even as sea ice shrinks for now, of course, for now. And they noted in their story that seals favored by Svalbard bears are becoming easier to hunt as ice declines, a study found. But researchers say the situation may be temporary. Of course, all good news is temporary. All tragic predictions are permanent. Them's the rules. I don't write them. They write them. The story also notes that this population of polar bears, which has been studied for 27 years, has increased and their health has improved, quote, despite predictions that melting sea ice would make it harder for them to find food. Maybe you guys should stop making predictions and just do the science. Give it a shot. Who knows? But wait. In 2017, climate change was starving the polar bears. Headline, New York Times, video of starving polar bear, quote, rips the heart out of your chest. The CBC in 2015, headline, photographer of horribly thin polar bear hopes to inspire climate change fight. And I don't know if Andy has it on the screen, but guess where that photo of the emaciated polar bear was taken? That's right, in the same place where we've now learned that the polar bears have never been fatter and happier over the last 27 years. Anthony, I'm exhausted reading all of that. Our betters, especially on the left, like to lecture us about our lack of, conservatives' lack of quote unquote media literacy. On this show, we actually teach media literacy. And one lesson is that the media lies to you and wants to manipulate the way you think to push an agenda. And this BS with the polar bears, I think, is a fantastic example.
It sure is, and it's a perfect example of what we have seen all through this whole climate alarmism period of the last 30 to 40 years. They will focus on one claim, and then they will make a headline about it, and then they completely forget about it. And then a couple of years later, somebody come out with another study, and this other study, negates that, but it sounds bad. So they will focus on that, and they will completely forget that they printed something completely the opposite of that. There used to be a website called, I forget what it was called, Warming whatever. Yeah, this is why the polar bears are getting fat. They're roasting penguins. So there used to be this website called the Warm List, and it was run by a fellow over in the UK. And he would systemically go through and document every one of these claims. And it was hilarious to read through it, because you could find a whole list of claims that said climate change is going to do this, and then another list of claims from the media that climate change is going to do the exact opposite. These folks don't have a clue what they're writing about. And I will say this, in the 40 years that I've been in television, radio, and newspaper, I was pretty much always the go-to guy when it came to science, because reporters in general don't understand science. They never took science in college. And so when they have to report on it, they just simply don't get it. And as a result, we end up with all these cruddy stories. And that's what places like whatsupwiththat.com are all about, and our climaterealism.com site are all about. Every day we go in and debunk this garbage. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It is so easy, because these people do not pay any attention to what they're writing. They just go with what the current flow is coming out of press releases.
Yeah, a friend and ally, Susan Crockford, polar bear expert. She's been writing about this for years, doing surveys of the literature of actual bear numbers and surveys. And she has also said, not just that, has she documented thoroughly that they're going up. Almost every subpopulation of polar bears has been increasing for decades as the planet has warmed. And she's explained, oh yeah, there's no question polar bears use sea ice. They do, because but what they do is they have to dig through it. And when the sea ice goes, the seals are still going to come up, and it'll be easier for them. She said this. And now that's what they're saying. But she's been poo-pooed. She's been dismissed. They say she's not qualified. Oh, she's an activist. Her surveys have been right. They're proven correct time and again. You look at real world data, 5,000 polar bears possibly in the 50s and 60s, 20 to 30,000 today, all while the planet has warmed. It's just bunk. Though one of our viewers may have come up with a possible alternative explanation for polar bears doing well. I don't know how it would help their birth rates and live births reaching adulthood, but we all know that the sweetener in Coca-Cola is making kids fat in schools. Maybe that's what's happening to the bears. All the Coke they're drinking. I think he's gone to something there.
Yep. All right. Well, that was fun. And it's always fun. The polar bears are the mascot of the climate alarmist movement, have been for a long time. And I guess they're going to have to find different work. Or they can just retire and roast penguins over an open flame. Either way is fine.
I have a feeling that particular image was doctored.
It might be.
I know for a fact there are no penguins in the Arctic Circle.
Yeah.
Gosh, you think?
Look at him.
I'm
They're getting them
They're
in.
fat and happy.
I'm not suspicious of the headphones or the Walkmans or whatever, but the penguin, I'm very suspicious of.
All right.
This is clearly made with AI.
This is way before AI. That's just an old.
Actually, I want to point out this is a 20-year-old image. It's way before AI.
For sure.
Yeah, that's the joke.
All right.
That's what I was trying to say.
All right. So we're going to get to Q&A. We've exhausted our crazy climate news, but not quite. Kicking around on Twitter this week, I came across Stephen Koonin. Stephen Koonin is a climate realist. He's been on this show once before. We have invited him to be a speaker at the 16th International Conference on Climate Change, which is April 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C. Get your tickets now. And he's invited to be on a panel talking about the Department of Energy's new climate report that does not contain any of the alarmist language in every other government climate report, but in fact gives you the real science and real data that tells you that there's nothing alarming going on at all. Now, he was on a panel with Andy Dessler is his name. He's an alarmist scientist himself. And I thought this was, if you started right from the beginning there, Andy, Stephen Koonin is spot on. And he was talking about that Department of Energy report. And so let's just play this and have a little reaction to it.
So the question, if I remember right, is what was the practical import of having many, 40% of the climate models being too sensitive? And your statement, Andy, that it was well known in the scientific community, indeed, true. But what matters is not the knowledge in the scientific community. What matters is the knowledge among the public, in particular, the decision makers. The presence of hot models allowed people to exaggerate the impacts, alleged impacts or possible impacts of greenhouse gases. The scientific community failed people like you, Andy, and people even more credentialed than you, did not stand up and say, no, that's not correct. The climate crisis was exaggerated, with the consequence that society ran down a rabbit hole of rapid decarbonization, deindustrialization of countries, rapid increases in electricity prices and degradation of the grid, scaring the bejesus out of young people about an impending climate catastrophe, and retarding the energy access and hence economic growth of more than half of the world. So yes, scientific honesty has consequences, Andy, and the climate community has failed to accurately represent the situation. The DOE report attempts to right that injustice.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's bullshit. Sorry.
Andy, you know, you're a tenured professor at one of the world's better universities. You should not be using the words like felony or bullshit.
Well, I'm sorry, but it is what it is.
And there you go. I disagree with Stephen Koonin on that. I think Stephen Koonin could use the term felony and bullshit and pointed toward the alarmists, but I'm a little more vulgar than he. Sterling, do you have any reaction to that little exchange?
Well, of course, I didn't see what Dressler said before that sparked Koonin's response. But, you know, Koonin is right. The DOE report is the antidote to climate alarmism. It's thoroughly footnoted and referenced. The problem is people like Dressler, they're in the bag for climate change. Their funding has for decades now depended on climate alarm. If alarmism goes away, if it's no longer an existential crisis, then money that flows to their research will flow to other things. I would like to see government funding out of science altogether. I don't think we need big government to have science. We did it before there was World War II. We could do it again. But we do have big government funding, and the government decides largely where to go with that funding based on the crisis of the day. And climate change is the crisis du jour. So when that crisis fades, their funding disappears and it goes to other things. You know, it was AIDS in the 70s and 80s. I'd like it to be cancer full time, or, you know, bio warfare and viruses full time. I'd like to see a lot more funding going to those things, orphan diseases. And maybe it will if we stop spending so much money on climate change. But then Dressler and people like him who've built their entire careers on this will see their funding dry up. And Coonan, is honest enough to point out, he doesn't say climate change isn't happening. He's never said that. When he was Obama's science advisor, he didn't say that. What he said very clearly is that it's been grossly exaggerated. The world is not coming to an end. And that's just a fact. That's just what the data shows. And Dressler can call it bullshit all he wants. He can say that people like Coonan are lying and committing felonies all he wants. He's on the wrong side of the facts and history on this point.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I liked his I would like it if we could clip just Coonan's summary there of what has happened with the climate alarmism industry over the last couple decades, and just use that as a clip to play every time like White House opens his mouth on the Senate floor or something. Like, it's a very, very good summation of what's actually going on. And I think most non like crazy out there climate scientists, even those who are a little bit alarmist, would probably agree with a lot of that. And in fact, Bill Gates agrees with that now. The perspective that you just demonstrated, Sterling, too, of like we should be focusing on tangible things that we can fix right now, like curing certain diseases in poor populations and stuff like that, are things that Bill Gates is now saying, this would have been a better use of these resources this whole time, basically. So I'm happy to see more and more people talking like that. We'll see how long it lasts. I mean, from Coonan it'll last, but like in general, that kind of rhetoric popping up on panels and stuff like that, or from major influential figures like Bill Gates, I think that's a very, very positive development.
Yeah, Anthony, Coonan made the point that, and I've made this point as just as a layman when speaking about someone like John Kerry or somebody else, the point that the models have been running hot. They've been running hot for decades. That is observably true. You can see that if you just look at the data yourself. And he was calling out the alarmist scientific community, if you want to call it that, for not telling the public the truth, that these models have been running hot and there's a problem with them. They just keep marching ahead with the agenda.
Right. They're caught up in a belief system. From their perspective, the models are running hot compared to observations because, well, there must be something wrong with the observations. They keep going back to the observations and trying to adjust them. They get them closer to the models. I mean, they cool the past. It's absolutely blatant what goes on with some of these adjustments to the observation. They cool the past to increase the slope of warming so that they're closer to the models. When you look at the raw data, it's not there. It's just not there. And so they are so beholden to their belief system, they can't even get their head around the truth. And these folks that do this, these climate modelers especially, they never get out of the office. They never go out and look at a weather station. I've had people tell me that these pictures of these weather stations that I've published are fabricated. Oh, no one would do anything like that. That's not science. Well, believe me, it is. They are that bad and they're worse. But these folks never get out of the office. And all they're doing is they've got blinders on. They're looking at these models. They're looking at the mathematics. And that's all that matters to them. Real world, forget that. And if the real world isn't conforming to our belief system, well, we'll just adjust it.
Yeah. They're going to conferences where their friends are. They're looking at their friends' research that supports their view. It's self, like you say, it's insular. The thing about the models, I've been told for decades, since the first climate models were introduced and used to make claims about future climate change, that they're getting better. Every iteration of models is getting better. Oh, they're more predictive. They're better. The temperature readings they're not. Since at the beginning, if models are better, they should be settling. They should be going down. The difference, the estimate range of what the temperature should be narrowing on a figure that, yep, this is where it is. Instead, they still have a wide gap, and sometimes it grows between model iterations. So the range of possible estimates is not getting better. That means the models aren't improving, because an improved model settles on something closer. They should be narrowing, and they should be more reflective of what the actual temperatures are. Anthony's right. They're in the position of saying, are you going to believe what we're telling you, or are you going to believe your lying eyes reading the data?
Yeah.
I want to address, sorry, just 1 second, Jim. Want to address this question from Gilbert on Facebook, who says, is there a website we can educate those people whose eyes have been closed to the truth that climate change is a hoax by globalists like Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum demons? Anthony, is there such a website?
Gosh, that's hard. Let me think. What's Up With That has 20 years worth of that. And Climate Realism has about 6 years of that. And Climate Depot from CFAC has about 20 years, almost 20 years of that. It's just
more concisely,
they've
Anthony,
got it too.
Climate at a Glance.
That too.
Very concise debunking materials.
The trick is getting these boneheads to read it. They just simply, they go, like the Three Monkeys.
You know, it's something really great that you can do. So you can go to the App Store on Google, or I believe also the Apple App Store, and you can download the Climate at a Glance app. And so when you're in a random conversation with someone who brings up something stupid, like hurricanes are getting worse, you can pull out your phone and you can pull up the Climate at a Glance app, which we have a QR code to download up in the corner right now on this video. Whoop. Backwards. Oh shoot, I don't know how to do this. Like this. You can instantly pull up all sorts of sources and graphics that show that it is complete and utter bunk very quickly, and it's awful hard to argue with data from official sources like that. So that is a very good resource for everyone. So use that QR code, download Climate at a Glance.
And honestly, if you want really, really granular, detailed, extensive explorations of what climate science really says, Heartland, we've been preeminent on the climate change issue for decades now. And one project that we did over the course of a decade was called Climate Change Reconsidered. Multi-volume sets refuting IPCC work. And if you really want data, if you really want references, if you want all that, yeah, look at that. It rivals the IPCC, except
it's like the New York phone book.
It's, well, back when they had phone books. It's something, like I said, Climate at a Glance, great summaries. But they're at a glance summaries. If you
and this
want
is
the
just
detail,
the biology one.
That's just the biology one. With the fossil fuel one, the point is, it's out there. You can promote this stuff. You can find this stuff and you can promote it. You can tell your friends. And if they say, well, that's just, look at that little booklet. That can't refute climate science. Okay, sure. Here's this tome. Boom. Hit them with it.
The problem with a lot of these alarmists is, unless it's from an approved source, they won't believe it. And that's what's great about Climate at a Glance, because everything we say in that website is about something from an approved source.
Yep. And you know what else is also an approved source?
Sorry,
an approved source of financial security? That would be the sponsor of this very podcast, called Advisor Metals. Now, if you're like me, you listen to tons of conservative shows and that are streaming out there, and you hear a lot of pitches for buying gold and silver and other precious metals. And but we want to tell you that of all the companies out there, you should trust our sponsor, Advisor Metals, and that's because the man who runs the company is a man of integrity, Ira Bershatsky. He's the managing member of Advisor Metals, and he does not employ those kind of high-pressure tactics or deceptive marketing ploys like many in big gold. He also doesn't deal in so-called rare coins. When you buy gold and other precious metals from Advisor Metals, you're dealing in quality bullion, and that is so much better when the time comes to liquidate this valuable physical asset. And when you buy from Advisor Metals, you're going to have that investment sent discreetly and directly to your very home. I also want to point out that Ira is advertising with the Heartland Institute and this program because he is an America First patriot. He does not donate to Democrats. He refuses to work with proxies of the Chinese Communist Party, and he, like us, abhors the machinations of organizations like the World Economic Forum and even the United Nations itself. That is why we are so proud to have him as the sponsor of this program. So if you want to diversify your investment portfolio, or if you want to back up your IRA with real physical bullion of precious metals, go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. You can leave your information there, and Ira or someone on his team will get back to you and make the whole process very, very easy. That's climaterealismshow.com/metals. And be sure to tell them who sent you. That way you help this show and us while also helping your financial future. Thank you very much for your attention to that matter. And now we are ready for, well, at least the audience's definite favorite part of the show, the Q&A. Take it away, Linnea.
Thank you very much. And good segue, Jim. Good job.
Yeah.
Not as good as mine yesterday, but
never as good as yours.
Smooth like fine Tennessee whiskey.
Yeah, there's Claire. Thank you, Claire. All right. So we've got a couple of good questions here. Today we have a few less questions than normal, but we're just we have a lot of our usual viewers today who are having a lot of fun in the chat. And so it is fun for us to read the chat. And so I might get a little bit sidetracked from time to time. But here's a question from LT Oracle of Truth. This is a really good question, I think. Here in Florida, everyone cranks their air nonstop for most of the year. We get a couple days that we need heat, and they say our grid was almost compromised. Why would a few days using heat cause an issue when cranking the air conditioning for the rest of the year does not?
Well, I would say baseboard heaters. A lot of those homes don't have efficient forced air systems. They have these very inefficient baseboard heaters, which draw a lot of current and produce a little bit of heat. They're not very efficient at all. So that might be the reason. I'm just guessing, though.
Alrighty. Yeah, and you might be I don't know who they are that say that the grid is almost compromised. Same thing happens here in South Carolina. Every time it's going to be cold, you get all sorts of notifications from Dominion saying, like, don't turn your heater up past 68 degrees or something. It's not so much, well, it might be in South Carolina that the grid would collapse, but it's also that they're just trying to preempt people from turning it up to like 82 with really inefficient heaters and stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that the grid currently cannot handle turning the heat on for a day.
It might also
side note that my friend Charles Rotter, who's the managing editor for What's Up With That, posted a picture privately to me yesterday showing, I believe it was at a pharmacy or a small grocery store there, where they had firewood on sale in Fort Lauderdale. How about that, huh?
There you go.
That's
yeah.
good.
I don't know if this would be true. I suppose you don't have a lot of fireplaces there in Florida, so you don't supplement your heat with wood and thus reduce your utilities. But what you also do have in Florida, and not every other state, some other states, you got a lot of rooftop solar there. I would wager the buy-in there is very high, and rooftop solar can work great during the summer. Of course, Florida gets its rains. There rains, but the rains usually don't last for very long, and the sun's out, shining. That's what they advertise for Florida. During the winter, the rooftop solar can still work in Florida until it ices over, and the sun's at a different angle and doesn't give direct, as much direct light. So that may be a problem that's new to Florida. I don't know.
All right, here we are with another question about cold in Florida from Wheelman, who says, is the cold weather in Florida an indication of the advent of another global cooling period? Anthony, what you got?
No, and no. Oh, and no again.
No,
weather, not climate.
I'm not going to necessarily agree with Anthony. I'm going to say we don't know.
Well,
We
there's that.
don't know. In the end, I am very confident that at some time in the future, we will have another glacial cycle. And we don't know when it'll start, and we don't know what might indicate it. So what's going on in Florida 2 years in a row, unusual. It's weather, Anthony's right, but it could become a long-term trend that might indicate a glacial cycle. We're not there.
But you can't determine that from a year of cold weather.
You can't determine it. That's right. But the point is, he asked the question, could it be an indication? It might turn out that it is. We don't know. We've got weather right now.
The only person on this podcast who might know would be Linnea. We'll be long dead, us three, but she might be around doing the Climate Realism show, and we'd be able to talk about the interglacial that way, or the end of the interglacial.
Yeah, it'll be me and my igloo. All right. From I think Dennis Stevenson, who says the GOP on the GOP carbon tax thing, isn't it just the usual protection of their own backside? So in-state industry pressure. That's what they'll claim. The framing of the carbon tax investigation thing is that we're going to stick it to the left and to China and stuff by proving that if you were to manufacture something in the United States, it would have lower carbon emissions than it being manufactured in China or in India or wherever. The problem with that is that you are selling our position. You are saying it is a problem that Chinese steel is higher emissions than US steel. Yeah. It's not. Who cares? Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. So they're selling us down the river long term on that issue in order to get a temporary, like, yeah, America, we have cleaner steel, which is true. We do. We almost certainly do, because
they cleaner everything.
Yeah, we have actually more environmentally friendly on all of those issues, not on the carbon issue. But the fact that they're focusing on the carbon dioxide issue is the problem. It actually doesn't help long term. But the way that they frame it is we're cheerleading American industries because we're better in these ways. But you don't have to do that. You can just say it's good to manufacture domestically. You don't have to take the climate change angle.
Well, isn't this really closely related to the so-called social cost of carbon, which we've covered at the climate conferences over the years? It's just it's this assumption that there's a cost to that is going to be very expensive down the line, and it's more expensive for us because we emit more per capita than anybody else. But just the whole idea that the social cost of carbon, that needs to be erased and wiped off of everything that this government does, and throw away the chalk.
Oh, that's right. Look. You measure emissions. What is it? Was it just pure comparison of emissions? Says nothing other than it says who's emitting more from certain industries. It says that. It's only a so-called danger if you tie it to something. And the social cost of carbon there is critical for that. It's, oh, well, look, they're imposing this much damage and we're going to suffer from it too. So, we should tax them, persuade them, tariff them, persuade them to change over so they're more like us. It's all part of one big, as a certain president I've heard might say, it's a climate hoax.
All right. Here's a funny question from Charlie B, who says, they could pivot to climate change making polar bears too fat, or would that be fat shaming the bears?
But they could, Is it really healthy for polar bears to be that fat? I don't know.
I love our audience. I really do. You guys are the best.
All right. So regarding the conference with Dessler and Coonan there, Stephen Fraser asks, is this conference available on YouTube? What's the name of it? Or I don't know the answer to this. What were they speaking at? I just saw it this morning. I didn't have time to track that down. So I apologize, but I'll see if I can do it while we're going through Q&A. All right. Sounds good. I will bring that one back up again in a little bit. All right. Okay, so Gilbert asks another good question, which is there a law that will imprison the likes of Al Gore or any climate alarmists like Greta Thunberg? They mislead a lot of people with misinformation.
There is no such
Well, you
law.
can only dream for that.
No, we don't want that, Anthony.
I believe in free speech, folks. I don't want that, but I want us to be treated the same way. Now, the only way to get at someone like that is if you could show that they're committing fraud, they have a fiduciary duty not to commit fraud, this kind of fraud, and it's harming people. That there's some kind of contract between them and the general public, and we don't have that. So no, there's no real law for that.
Yeah, you got a point.
All right. Here is, Mike John wants to know, what about cycles? What about the 1500-year cycle that they talk about? And before you jump in, Anthony, I'm going to say, I think people really need to allow themselves to look at natural and even cyclical processes in nature, not like a rigid engineering calculation, because even cycles that we depend on for day-to-day life, like the rising of the sun and stuff, and the way that the earth moves around the sun and the way that the moon moves around the earth, they change over time. They're never quite exactly the same. They shift in different directions, and there's no particular pattern to all of it. There's a smudge factor. And even when you look at, paleoclimate data, as good as the data is, which is, again, up for grabs, it's not like, okay, it's been 10,000 years, time to have an interglacial. Like there's some fudge factor there. There's a little bit of smudging at the edges. So you can't use it. You can't it's not like a doomsday clock where you can count and you can say, okay, in 500 years on April 2nd, we are going to begin to enter a glacial cycle again or whatever. It's just, it doesn't work that way.
Well, I don't need to say anything at all now. You've covered it well.
Okay. But they are real. The cycles are real, but they're
and there's multiple and overlapping cycles. There's oceanic cycles for ocean patterns. There's short-term cycles like El Nino, La Nina. There are solar cycles. There's the Milankovitch cycle, and they overlap. And they have varying levels of influence. I know Anthony doesn't believe the sun has anything to do with climate change, but gosh, respected people like Willie Soon disagree very strongly, and their whole work is built on that.
And then there's unicycles, usually driven by mimes.
So yeah, it's a lot more complicated. You can't set your watch to these things, that's for sure. And you can't even set your watch to the actual.
The only one you can actually set your watch to is the rise of the sun and the set of the sun, but that changes all the time. But you can at least set your watch to it based on the calculations that we know exist that predict it.
Yep. But Charles Rotter disagrees. He says the next ice age made a reservation on Open Table, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, which is fantastic. Thank you.
I'll bet penguins on the menu.
Yeah. John Bind asks a terrific question. Is the climate going to change?
Yes.
Yes.
It always has, always will.
Yeah. I'm not a betting man, but that's something I'd put money on.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. So, okay, here's an interesting question from LT Oracle of Truth, who says, we have mainly been mandated to use heat pumps here, I believe in Florida. Could that be an issue? I heard they are insufficient in Canada.
They generally are in extremely cold environments because they're trying to extract heat from an already cold atmosphere. And while they have some effectiveness in doing that, below a certain point, they're just really not effective at all. And I do not recommend heat pumps in northern latitudes whatsoever, because you're going to freeze in the winter. They're fine, for mid-latitude places, but northern latitudes, you're just asking for trouble.
Yeah, if your winter time like frost layer goes too deep, then they just kind of don't work anymore, and they
No,
start
in
drawing
the UK,
electricity.
you don't have to be in that cold a place though. In the UK, they've largely started mandating these things instead of modern air conditioning systems, and they're having all sorts of difficulties. People are being very cold in the winter. It's just not doing the job, and that's not, you look at the old Dickinsonian pictures of England, and yeah, you saw a lot of snow there, but no one thinks that the UK is Norway, for instance, or Iceland. Yet even in that relatively moderate climate, heat pumps can't do the job.
Maybe we'll have to have a heat pump episode someday, or touch on it for its own thing, because it is interesting. Alrighty, so William says the problem with carbon taxes is that no one knows where the burden will fall, which depends on the sensitivities of buyers and sellers to increase in prices associated with the tax. Right, Sterling?
Well, no, unless you make biased carbon taxes, so you select particular industries, or we're only going to tax the wealthy, so we'll impose a carbon tax on the 1%. If you impose a general carbon tax, we know who it's going to burden: the poor the most. If you put a carbon tax on emissions from heating and air conditioning systems, Al Gore laughs it off. Average people don't laugh it off. If you put a carbon tax at the pump, a person that can afford to drive a Ferrari and a Bugatti, they can laugh it off. The person who drives a Chevy pickup or some other vehicle, they can't laugh it off. We know who a carbon tax will hurt the most. Who taxes hurt the most always? The poor.
Alrighty. Yeah, and we could go on for a while too with the heat pump thing. We had another question from Guffpot who said, "I've never heard anyone explain how they work at high levels on inner city apartment developments. Are they attached to the outside at the 10th floor?" Yeah, we'll have to. We'll probably have to have a heat pump episode, and so hold on to these if we do one of those, because it's a good one.
Let me say one more thing. I said it hurts the poor. There's a reason for that. If you look at demographics, we find out that poor people spend more as a percentage of their income on energy intensive housing, fuel, food, all these things that require a lot of energy. They spend a larger percentage of their discretionary income on that. So when you tax that, more of the discretionary income is now going to that.
All right, so back to Stephen's questions. It seems like we weren't able to find the answer to this. We'll keep digging and maybe repost it to the Heartland X account or something if we can find it, or put it in the comments here underneath this video on YouTube, stuff like that. So we'll try to
go, Jim.
We'll try to get you up.
Jim.
We'll
create a demand that we can't satisfy.
No.
Way to go.
Yeah, I will. No. We will launch our Google Foo with full attention after the show is over.
By the way, I want to mention that when we have the conference, April 8th and 9th, we're going to be doing this show live from the conference as part of the segment there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be really fun. Yes, right there. All righty. Scott Clay asks, isn't a resistance heater 100% efficient?
Nope.
I don't think so.
And I've got no idea what a resistance heater is, so I can't comment.
That's somebody that lives in Cuba.
All right, we have from Jerry Palmer, how many real problems could have been solved if so much money hadn't been spent on a fictional crisis?
That's an answer that we don't have, but boy, oh boy, a lot of money was thrown at these ridiculous non-existent problems.
I can answer one. I can tell you one crisis that would be solved. We spent trillions of dollars on the climate crisis. There are 1 billion people in developing countries that don't have access to reliable energy. We could have built coal plants for those people. We could have built natural gas plants. They could be out of energy poverty and thus on the road to being out of poverty per se. We could have done that with that money. I think we could have electrified Africa. Maybe if we could get someone sane in North Korea, and the decimated parts, the destitute parts of Asia and South America, we could have electrified all those places with the money that we spent on climate change.
Yep. Jay Wester says, now that carbon has been proven to not be a pollutant, will that not make it illegal to impose carbon taxes? I wish. If endangerment gets taken down, which it should be, but if it gets taken out, I mean, carbon dioxide is not a pollutant, but I don't know if it's possible to prove that it's not a pollutant. And certainly they can tax all kinds of things that are not pollutants. So, and they do tax all kinds of things that are not, themselves harmful. So I wouldn't hold your breath on that one.
The only thing that would make it illegal to impose a carbon tax is passing a law saying you may not pass a carbon tax.
Absolutely. This is an interesting question for Anthony. Gilbert asks, I was wondering who is the father or sole originator or entity or organization of the whole global warming or climate change, knowing the enemy is winning half the battle?
Well, there's two trains of thought I could comment on. As far as the theory goes, it goes way back to the turn of the 20th century. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Arrhenius, I think is his name, who originally postulated, that carbon dioxide would cause a warming, but it really never went anywhere after he did that little bit of science. But what really changed things was in June of 1988 with Dr. James Hansen of NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, GISS, in New York City, an adjunct of Columbia University. He came up with the very first climate model that became popular. And he went before Congress in June of 1988 to say, we have a problem. And he had these 3 different scenarios that he was pushing. Now, this was a political hit job for those of you that don't know. He was sponsored by Senator Timothy Wirth, a Democratic senator from Colorado. And they went and made some stagecraft. They went into the hearing room the night before and opened up the windows and so forth and disabled the air conditioning. And the reason was so that when the hearing happened the next day, people were sweating for the cameras. They had actually checked with the Weather Service to find out what is going to be the hottest day in the month of June or in the next couple of weeks. And they scheduled the hearing for that day. So they had all this stagecraft going on so that people were sweating on camera. And Timothy Wirth later went on Frontline and confirmed this stagecraft, and said it was bliss, talking about the different people sweating on camera. And of course, all these senators and mucky mucks bought this thing hook, line, and sinker. We've got a problem. Let's throw some money at it. And that's what they did. And that really is when it got launched.
Yeah. And unfortunately, as with many, bad things in this world, there isn't like one person that if you just threw them in jail, then it would fix everything kind of a situation. It's too far. There's too many people, too many moving parts, too much money involved. It's whack-a-mole at that point.
Don't joke about throwing people in jail. There's a lot of people on the other side that would like to throw all of us in jail, thinking that'll solve the problem. But their real problem is that reality keeps smashing headfirst into their BS.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all I've run out of questions, actually. So we are, I believe we are done with the Q&A portion for today. So thank you so much to all our audience for your questions and everything. It's always fun to talk to you guys. I will hand it back to Jim.
All right. Thanks very much, Linnea. And that will do it for today's Climate Realism show. I want to mention again that the early bird tickets that you can get for the 16th International Conference on Climate Change at the Hotel Washington in Washington, D.C. It's happening April 8th and 9th So just a few months away. You're going to want to be there if you are interested in this topic and you're interested in meeting and talking to and hanging out with not just us, and we are fun, but also some fantastic scientists. It's a very important conference if you want to understand this issue. And we're going to be talking about science, and we're also going to be talking about policy moving forward in the Trump administration. We're barely a year into it. It seems like 5 already, but there's still a lot to do. We do have feelers out to several high-level people in the Trump administration to come and speak at the conference. So the early bird rate ends this weekend. So I suggest if you want to save a little bit of coin on those tickets, that you get it done by Saturday night. I also want to thank our streaming partners, Junk Science, CFAC, the CO2 Coalition. Well, What's Up With That, Climate Depot, and Heartland UK Europe. Want to thank, of course, our regular panel, Linnea Lucan, Sterling Burnett, and Anthony Watts. Remember, always visit climaterealism.com. Go to climateataglance.com and get the app so you can have all the climate information at your fingertips 24/7. We also have Energy at a Glance, which you should check out if you're interested in that topic. And of course, always visit heartland.org, where you can not only learn more about this organization and how to support us, but also have a link right there to our climate conference. It's been a pleasure presenting the show to you all this week, and we will see you again next week. Bye-bye.